Splinter Cell is another series that I grew up with. It was actually my introduction into the stealth genre of video games. It was released back in, holy shit, November of 2002? Damn, I feel old. Anyway, it's 2018 now, and for all of the great next-gen games that we have, I've noticed that there's been a considerable lack of stealth games, which made me think, what the hell happened to Splinter Cell? And then that got me thinking, which Splinter Cell out of the series is the best title? The last time that we saw Splinter Cell was back in August of 2013. It's been almost 5 years, so what the fuck happened? Well, let's take a look back, and I'll walk you through my personal experience with the Splinter Cell series. Now, I can't remember when I first heard of Splinter Cell, but I do remember getting Pandora Tomorrow for my Xbox. I had played the first one, and I couldn't get very far at the time. It was a pretty tough game for 12-year-old me. When I got my hands on Pandora Tomorrow, I played that all the way through in one sitting. Now that's when I became addicted to stealth games. The soundtrack is probably the best out of the series, and it has the best atmosphere, plus the voice acting is top-notch. The game does make you feel like a pretty crazy badass playing as Sam Fisher, sneaking up on people, snapping necks, putting guns up to their head, interrogating them. It was all great, super spy, stealth fun. And the voice of Sam Fisher is equally as badass. Michael Ironside is a fucking national treasure as far as I'm concerned. Now, one thing I've noticed over the years about Splinter Cell is how many differences each version of the game has. For example, Splinter Cell on Xbox was always much better in graphical quality, and usually had different exclusive levels. However, that doesn't mean that the PS2 and the GameCube didn't get any exclusives. The PS2 version of the first Splinter Cell had a different opening cutscene and an exclusive level all on its own, while the GameCube had support to plug in your Game Boy and use that as a map in real time. The differences in Pandora Tomorrow from console to console were minor, with the PS2 version getting an exclusive level while the Xbox version sported better graphics and better load times. The GameCube version was mostly identical to the PS2 version, with only minor graphical differences. Anyway, going backwards for a moment, I can tell you that the first Splinter Cell was great for its time. It has the basic bare bones of what a Splinter Cell game should be. It's an okay introduction to the series, but it hasn't aged so well, so it definitely is not definitely not the best out of the series, but that doesn't make it a bad game. Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow is it's just the icing on top of the cake. It keeps everything that the first game did right, and throws away all the things that didn't work, while also improving on the aspects that made the first game great. Now, we move on to what is probably the best out of the series, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. Now, honestly, this game is a masterpiece. It doesn't get much better than this. It has great graphics, great gameplay. It is a true stealth game experience. For it being over a decade old, it still holds up today. Chaos Theory is a perfect example of taking what worked from previous entries in the series and making them better with each iteration. There is so much I can say about Chaos Theory, but none of what I say can truly explain the genius behind the game. One of the biggest differences in Chaos Theory was the AI. In the two previous titles, if you left an unconscious or dead body in a well-lit place, an alarm would go off, even if there wasn't anyone actually around to find the body. Now, in Chaos Theory, marked a big change. A body would actually have to be discovered by a patrolling guard or a security camera in order to actually trigger an alarm. If you did trigger an alarm, it didn't mean game over this time around. Instead, the NPCs became more aware and aggressive. Now, this helped make the game feel more authentic and fair. One of the best features of Chaos Theory was the option of going non-lethal during gameplay. Every enemy's life was in your hands this time around. You could choose to go into the level and be a ghost, never interacting with any of the NPCs, never being spotted, and getting out with none the wiser to your presence. Or, you could go in there and break necks, throw and pull guys over railings, slice everyone's throat, or just unload on them with your gun. The game gave a sense of freedom to the player, being as brutal or as merciful as you wish to be. With Chaos Theory, the only differences between the console versions that I'm aware of are mostly graphical. Now, the Xbox version is the superior version with the best graphics and the best load times, and it had downloadable missions via Xbox Live, while the PS2 and the GameCube versions have minor differences in level layouts, which unfortunately makes the game or the versions of the level in their game, it makes them feel a lot more linear. And they only loaded in chunks of a level at a time, whereas the Xbox version actually loaded in the whole level in its entirety. Now, I would like to say that Chaos Theory is the best out of the series, but first, let's just keep looking forward. Splinter Cell Double Agent is where the series gets complicated. Now, first off, there are two different versions of the game. Double Agent came out back in October of 2006, right near the end of the 6th console generation. So the PS2, the GameCube, the Wii, and the Xbox versions are completely different than the PS3 and the Xbox 360 versions. Secondly, this is where the story actually came into play for me this time around. What I mean is, the previous titles all kind of revolved around Third Echelon and Sam Fisher trying to avert some sort of terrorist attack or what have you. Honestly, I couldn't even tell you who the bad guys were in the first 3 games. They're almost interchangeable and they're completely forgettable, along with any semblance of a story to go along with it. But this time around, the story got personal. Sam Fisher is more of a character this time. You can actually really get behind him. No homo. His daughter is killed in a car accident by a drunk driver, and it drives Sam into a deep depression that affects all aspects of his life. This eventually leads him to becoming a double agent, hence the title of the game, for Third Echelon, to infiltrate a domestic terror organization known as John Brown's Army, or the JBA. So a few things to mention about each version of the game. First off, in the 6th generation of consoles, the gameplay is almost identical to Chaos Theory with just a few tweaks. Some of the story threads play out much better in this version of the game while others do not. In the 7th generation of consoles, that's the PS3 and the 360, the graphics have a huge bump in quality and the gameplay is tweaked a little bit more. The PS3 and the 360 versions, they have much more style and visual flair than the other versions do, along with more entertaining levels and set pieces, but the story really suffers for this. In this version of the game, depending on your actions throughout the game, you can actually change the outcome of the ending, even unlocking a bonus level if done correctly. Double Agent is complicated for me personally. I do enjoy the story and the characters. Sam Fisher is much more relatable and sympathetic in this game, and the double agent aspect is played up perfectly. Each version of the game has its ups and its downs, but overall, I lean more towards the original Xbox version. The story is handled a little bit better, and the gameplay is just as good as it was in Chaos Theory. Splinter Cell Conviction is a very different game in the series. It actually had an interesting development. Originally, Conviction was supposed to come out in 2007, but was pushed back until 2010. Sam underwent a makeover during development too. First, he sported longer hair and had a fully grown beard, a full 180 when you compare his look to Double Agent. But by the time that the game was released, he reverted back to a similar look that the fans were familiar with. The gameplay was undergoing changes as well. At first, levels were going to be designed with a sandbox style in mind, which would have given the player more freedom and interaction with gameplay. And at one point, Sam would have been able to blend in with the crowds to avoid detection. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because you're thinking of Assassin's Creed. For whatever reason, however, this version of the game never came to fruition. What we did get was a complete reinvention of the series. Interestingly enough, this game was only ever released on the Xbox 360, and not on all the other consoles like its predecessors. So yeah, this game. I don't know how I feel about this one, so let's just jump in. A lot of the features that were included in the previous entries are gone. This game plays a lot more like a third-person shooter than a stealth game. Apparently, the Jason Bourne movies were an inspiration for the direction that they were wanting to take the franchise in. You were no longer able to approach NPCs in a non-lethal manner, and you could no longer hide bodies. Also gone were the light and sound sensors on the HUD to indicate how well hidden you were. It really seems like stealth took a back seat this time around. Now, they did add a few new features. One is called Mark and Execute, where you can mark up to as many as 4 enemies, depending on which gun you're using, and with the push of a button, kill them all instantly. Another addition is the last known position. It's a visual representation of where the enemy thinks Sam is. You can use this to your advantage, allowing you to flank enemies. Lastly, they added in an interrogation minigame of sorts. At certain times throughout the game, you can interact or interrogate an NPC and use the environment against them. You could bash their faces into sinks, pianos, and whatnot. It is actually pretty brutal, almost akin to torture at some points. Objectives in this game were also displayed on the environment in a weird projection-looking sort of thing. The game overall really does look, feel, and play like it's a Jason Bourne-inspired game. I just can't decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now let me be clear. First off, this is definitely not a Splinter Cell game. It's called Splinter Cell. It has all the characters from Splinter Cell. But at the end of the day, it's not Splinter Cell. The features and the mechanics that made Splinter Cell popular to begin with, and fun, they're all gone in this sequel. Instead, they felt the need to reinvent the series. Now, I'm not sure what led to this idea, and I think it was indeed a mistake, and it's probably what led to the death of the franchise. However, as a game in general, it's actually pretty fucking fun. Stealth is still an option here, and when you do pull it off, it's actually very satisfying. The mark and execute feature is tons of fun to play with, and when you can set it up to take out a whole room of enemies in one go without being detected, it can be extremely rewarding. Now, as for the story, it's not so good. It's all told as if it's already happened in sort of a flashback form. With the decision to make Sam a cold-blooded killer, it really changes his character from the last game. He's much more serious and intense and brooding, and very much more less relatable. Overall, Splinter Cell Conviction, it's fun, it's fast-paced, but that doesn't make it a good Splinter Cell game. Now, lastly, the final entry in the series, Splinter Cell Blacklist. Now, for this one, I know exactly how I feel about it. I fucking hate it. And the worst part is, the game is actually pretty fun. Now, this time around, the game was released for the Xbox 360, the PS3, and the Wii U, but there is virtually no differences between them. The story is where I have my biggest issues with this entry. At the end of Conviction, it definitely appeared as if Sam was done with Third Echelon and working for the government, yet for some reason now he's not just working for the government, but he's also the commander of the newly formed Fourth Echelon. What the fuck? Without spoiling the previous game, it makes zero fucking sense that this is where Sam would have ended up. It's not creative, it's not interesting, and the story, it suffers for it. It's just another generic stop the terrorists before they blow something up recycled plot from every other super spy related movie. The story isn't personal anymore, and therefore it makes Sam Fisher even more unrelatable. Moving past the story and into gameplay, the gameplay is actually much better than Conviction. Sam traverses the environments with ease and grace while also kicking ass and shooting motherfuckers in the head. The action and the stealth, they blend so much more creatively this time. Splinter Cell Blacklist is kind of like Chaos Theory mixed with Conviction. It's fast-paced, yet it holds on to its roots. Unfortunately, that's about all I can say for it. Overall, even though the gameplay is fun, it's overshadowed by boring story and dull characters. Now, I personally hated that they recast Michael Ironside as Sam Fisher, with whoever the fuck this idiot is. I looked him up on IMDb and I saw that he was in the new 50 Shades of Grey movies, and I immediately felt justified for my hatred of him. By the time Blacklist came out, I was invested in the story of Splinter Cell. Even though the first 3 games were not the best pieces of good storytelling, I thought that they made an excellent trilogy. So, after that, starting with Double Agent, I really liked how personal that story became. Sam wasn't just some super spy, he was a human being to me at that point. He had feelings, he had emotions, he had motivations and morals. So when they changed him into a Jason Bourne clone, I wasn't happy about it, but I did go along for the ride. I looked at Conviction as a low point for Sam. He had lived for his daughter, and then when she died, he lost hope and didn't care who got in his way. So it made sense to me for him to behave the way he did in Conviction. But then Blacklist came out, and I couldn't have been more annoyed. It was like they pushed the reset button, that they wanted to start over. He'd gone from being this sort of tragic, badass lone wolf to a government golden boy again. It couldn't have been more wrong. They did such a good job setting up his character, his motivations, up to this point, that it just didn't make sense to me. But enough of my soapbox. So, which game out of the series is the best? Well, if we're just talking about the single-player experiences, then the obvious choice is Chaos Theory. It had the best gameplay that allowed for the most freedom of choice in how to pursue your objectives. The games before Chaos Theory, they just haven't aged well. They're good games, though, don't get me wrong. And the games after Chaos Theory tried to change too much, and it just got watered down under all of the whole process of it, especially when you get to Conviction. Now, Blacklist tried to fix some of the issues that Conviction, presented, but at that point, it was just too little, too late. So, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is the one that's the best out of the series. That's my decision anyway. Do you agree with me, or do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.